Welcome to this new video from the series The Musicians Weekly. And I have been asked how we find, or how I find, all this substantial music that is totally unknown. So mainly I want to say that I try to perform in every program at least one really unknown piece, and to do this always alongside with very well known and very, very good music we know, and which is part of the core repertoire, at least to some degree. But how to find it? I can give you an example, and this is concerning the Dresden symphonists. So Dresden was very famous in the late Romantic, so-called late Romantic era for the performances of Ernst von Schuch of the works by Richard Strauss, in particular of his operas. And so there were these extremely successful premieres and following performances of Strauss operas in Dresden. And if you look at the archives and what is concerned to be the highlights, it is always these Strauss things. But there was not only Strauss. So there was one composer who became composition professor in Dresden. He was not from Dresden. He was born in Coburg. And Coburg is also the town of birth of Friedrich Rückert. And this composer is Felix Draeseke. He was born in 1835. And then he became a Liszt disciple, and he was the most radical composer of the modernist Liszt fraction. And then finally, when Liszt had to leave to Italy from Weimar, also Draeseke left, and he left for 14 years to Switzerland, to Lausanne. And these years he considered afterwards as lost years. But then he returned to Germany, and he became professor of composition in Dresden. And he was a fantastic teacher. This we know because of the pupils he had. And so Draeseke himself was also a symphonist. He was mainly a really great composer of sacred music, but also wonderful chamber music, a lot of very good piano music, and some really great orchestral works. Among them 4 symphonies. The Symphony No. 0 is not anymore extant. But the first symphony was written in his earlier time, and it was considered a difficult piece, which it is if it is not understood. The second symphony was more successful in F major, and it founded his reputation as a symphonist. A symphonist which was sometimes called the third power apart from Brahms and Bruckner. He didn't like Brahms in particular, and he was also not a fan of Bruckner. He admired Richard Wagner a lot, but when Richard Wagner took the wife of Hans von Bülow and made her his own wife, the daughter of Liszt, Cosima, then Draeseke distanced himself, and he ran out a little bit of really good contacts. And also he distanced himself from Liszt because he thought that Liszt was not such a good sacred music composer, and finally thought that Liszt was not really a good composer. So whatever, Draeseke had to rely on very few performances with his symphonic music. And this second symphony, which has a wonderful second movement, which is not really slow, it's a kind of allegretto marciale, and it is a very fresh piece. And there are some seeds for the Don Juan of Richard Strauss in this symphony, in the first movement, which is very interesting. Then Draeseke wrote his third symphony, the so-called Symphonia Tragica, which became his main success. It is a work of cyclical architecture and with a fantastic final movement. And it was a great success under Bülow, under Nikisch, under Nicodé, and under many other conductors at the time. The fourth symphony Draeseke wrote in his last year. It was called Symphonia Comica, and it was first print was only in the 21st century, and it's also a very good symphony, but it is very difficult to find one's way through this symphony. So the symphonies we will rely most on are symphonies number 2 and 3, definitely. And he showed real great character as a symphonist. Not so much melodic invention, but fantastic architecture, very interesting harmony, and fine rhythm and all these things, very good orchestration, very differentiated. And his main pupil was Paul Büttner. Now, we rediscovered, we were the pioneers in Büttner's music on Aldila Records. We did the first recordings of his string trio and of his string quartet. And there were fabulous performances of the string trio, definitely. Also the string quartet, we didn't do as a string quartet, we did as a string symphony. It works. It's not so easy, but it works. And Büttner also is a fantastic architect of symphonic music, which you can hear in the string quartet, but you can definitely hear also in the symphonies and in the symphonic works he wrote apart from the symphonies, and also in his violin sonatas. Büttner didn't write too much. He was a very strange guy in some way. He was born in 1870, and he was a Dresden boy from the first hour, and he died in 1943. He had a Jewish second wife, and he protected her from the Nazis, and he died of tongue cancer. It was a horrible end for him. And when the Nazis came to power, he lost all the positions, as lost his wife, her positions. And so he had a very tragic life, and he was a fantastic teacher himself, and he was a phenomenal musician. As a composer, he is melodically much more inventive than his teacher Draeseke. And all the pieces are full of remarkable melodies. So we have all the 4 symphonies in the case of Büttner. The 3rd symphony, when he had written the 3rd symphony, he was writing on his 4th, which was in First World War in 1915. Suddenly Artur Nikisch did the premiere of his 3rd symphony, and this was a great breakthrough for Büttner. It was the first performance of a symphony he had, so then came the premieres of the 1st and 2nd symphonies, and he finished his 4th symphony, and it was also premiered. Now, Büttner's destiny as a composer is very special. He stayed a totally German phenomenon. So his culmination of career was in the First World War, when Germany was totally isolated. After the war, composers like him seemed not to be anymore that interesting. So there was modernism and all these things that were en vogue in the so-called Wilhelmine era. They were extinguished, they vanished. So only some composers who were now very famous, like Richard Strauss or Hans Pfitzner, stayed up in the trend to some degree, but all the other things vanished. All this kind of large orchestra music written by composers like Sigmund von Hausegger or Emil Nikolaus von Reznicek or Hermann Hans Wetzler and so on. All this was wiped away, Heinrich Gottlieb Nohr and so on. And many of these names are totally unknown today. So Büttner was also totally unknown. Then he was suppressed during the Third Reich, and afterwards his widow, she did a lot of effort to help his music get played, and so he was considered an important symphonist in the German Democratic Republic. But again, it was an isolated Germany. So it was only a German phenomenon then also. But also, many of the younger composers, the more modern composers, distanced themselves quite aggressively from the music of Büttner. And he was thought about like a kind of imitator of his teacher Draeseke, which he is absolutely not. So Büttner wrote 4 phenomenal symphonies, all the 4. And he wrote some more pieces for orchestra, which are phenomenal, and a concert piece for violin, and this string quartet, this string trio in canonic form, and the 3 violin sonatas and some more little music. There's also a lot of male choir music with orchestra, which is, of course, today has almost no chance to be performed. And also an opera, Anka. But anyhow, Büttner was really a great composer. And I will also give you some introduction to his music at a later stage. But he was not the only one of these people apart from Draeseke, who was not from Dresden. There was also Jean-Louis Nicodé. He was born in 1853. And he was the greatest German program music symphonic poem composer of the time, apart from Richard Strauss. A phenomenal composer. And in particular, there is his ode, The Sea, and there is his Glorious Symphony. And the Glorious Symphony is something like Havergal Brian's Gothic Symphony. It's an incredibly large piece with large forces, and it is phenomenally composed. It is some of the most imaginative music written at all times. There is still no modern performance, no real recording. There's only a recording with artificial means, a computer recording by Stefan Fahl, who did this hard work to do it. And there is, of course, printed score, and there are parts in the library in Dresden, and so one can do it. And Nicodé was not only this composer of large pieces, he was a fantastic piano composer. There is a wonderful piano sonata. There are pieces in style of Schumann, for example. It sounds like a real Schumann on the same level, but you don't know it. And of course, a lot of pieces in his own style. And he was also a fantastic composer of light music. So this is really to be explored. And he is still only one of them. He died in 1919. But then there is a composer, Heinrich Schulz-Beuthen. There was one CD conducted by Adriano with a symphony by Schulz-Beuthen, which was released by Sterling, like the first Büttner historic performances CD also. And this Schulz-Beuthen was also a great master, but he died in complete poverty. And it was thought that almost all his music had burned in the Dresden bombing in 1945. But no, little by little, some pieces reappear. And my friend Adriano wants to do a second recording of another symphony by Büttner and of a string serenade of some music, not Büttner, by Schulz-Beuthen. And he wrote the pieces in score, and he produced the parts, and everything is ready, and he's looking for a sponsor to do it. And I hope he will be successful. It would be really great to have a second CD with the music by Schulz-Beuthen. And of course, it would be much greater to have this music performed in concerts in Dresden. And then there's another composer, Paul Scheinpflug. He's the same year as Maurice Ravel, and he also died in the same year as Maurice Ravel, 1875 to 1937. And he was in his young years a phenomenal composer. He wrote a wonderful large symphonic poem. He wrote some other orchestral music. He was a very well-known conductor of high skill, but there are no recordings. Great pity. And he did a lot of world premieres, for example, Heinz Thyssen, for example, Alexander Djerepnin, and so on. And he also wrote some wonderful chamber music. Nobody knows it. A violin sonata, a string quartet, and in particular a piano quartet. They are music full of passion, totally non-academic. And he was also a pupil of Draeseke, like Paul Büttner. And this Scheinpflug really has to be rediscovered. In his early days, he was really a very, very well-known composer. But he's totally forgotten. And one of the reasons is that in his late years, he tried to please the Nazi party and wrote some music quoting some nationalist songs, which is not very precious. And maybe this destroyed also his posthumous reputation. So forget about it. There are many composers who didn't foresee these things. And he died in 1937, so he could not really know how it will happen in the years after. Anyhow, all these Dresden composers are not at all promoted by the city of Dresden or by the Saxonian state. And so we have to do it. We did now some Büttner, and now Büttner is also coming on the symphonic level. That means CPO did a CD with Büttner, now Capriccio will do a CD with Büttner. And so finally he will be better known internationally now for the first time. But it is very important to do really good performances in concert of this music. And I hope I can do some of these in the future. And then really we have to take care of Nicodé, of Scheinpflug, of Schulz-Beuthen, and also, of course, again, of Draeseke, who is not so easy to perform. So I'm very happy that I could work with the Constanza Quartet from Salzburg, and we did the 3 string quartets. We rehearsed, we really worked on them, and they did very beautiful recordings of these 3 string quartets for CPO. So these you can buy, as you can buy our recordings on Aldila Records of Büttner's this trio sonata for string trio and his string quartet as a string symphony. And I really recommend you to listen to this music and to build up your own experiences with it. They are great composers and they are forgotten now, and we want to take them out of the niche. So I hope you liked this video and see you soon. All best.